Bom dia! Bom dia a todos e todas. Que prazer, que alegria recebê-los mais uma vez para essa última atividade do 5º Encontro de Professores de Inglês para Crianças e do 4º Seminário de Avaliação em Línguas Estrangeiras para Crianças. Hoje nós temos a nossa última palestra, a nossa palestra de encerramento. Eu vou, antes de iniciar, propriamente dito, a nossa atividade dessa manhã, vou dar alguns recadinhos rápidos. Essa palestra, eu acho que é importante a gente dizer, né, que essa fala que nós teremos agora pela manhã, como uma fala de encerramento do nosso querido EPIC, ela foi também propositalmente pensada, planejada. Se vocês vão se lembrar, quem está aí nos acompanhando desde as primeiras atividades do EPIC, a nossa primeira mesa redonda, ela foi sobre avaliação, né? Porque nós temos realmente nós, pesquisadores e pesquisadoras da área de educação linguística com crianças, nós temos nos dedicado com muito carinho, com muita atenção às questões que envolvem a avaliação nesse processo. Então, nessa manhã, nós escolhemos encerrar o nosso EPIC falando de avaliação, né? Na esperança de que nós possamos cada vez mais compreender que a avaliação para a aprendizagem, ela precisa estar desde o início do processo até o final. Então, nessa manhã, em que nós teremos a professora Fernanda Gonzalez, nós temos a alegria, o prazer, a satisfação de receber aqui conosco para mediar essa fala, mediar essa conversa sobre a avaliação, a nossa querida parceira, integrante do grupo de pesquisa Felite, professora Gladys Quevedo Camargo. Bom dia, Gladys.
Bom dia, Juliana, que prazer estar aqui, muito obrigada, viu, pelo convite, estou muito feliz de estar aqui.
O prazer é todo nosso, aliás, nós queremos agradecer a professora Gladys, ela que fez o contato com a professora Fernanda, e acho que o EPIC, né, Gladys, assim como o próprio grupo de pesquisa, ele se caracteriza justamente por essas redes, essas conexões, né, que tem se formado e que, assim, falando em avaliação, falando pelos feedbacks que a gente recebe, né, o quanto tem sido importante essa rede, essas conexões, principalmente quando nós falamos dessa atividade, que é ensinar ou educar linguisticamente crianças, né, que até então era uma atividade um tanto quanto isolada, né, em que as pessoas atuavam se sentindo realmente sozinhas, sem saber como o que fazer, se estavam fazendo certo ou não, né? E a gente tem visto que temos conseguido aí criar uma rede de suporte, uma rede de apoio. Então, muito obrigada, Gladys, por ter feito aí essa conexão.
Imagina, foi um prazer. A professora Elsa Fernanda é minha amiga, minha colega de trabalho na La Alta, que é a Language Testing Association for Language Testing. For Testing and Assessment, e acho que ela vai contribuir bastante, porque ela é uma pessoa muito experiente, então eu estou muito feliz de poder trazê-la pela primeira vez, entre aspas, para o Brasil, espero que seja a primeira vez. Eu acho que ela vai trazer contribuições muito bacanas para o grupo e para todo o pessoal que está assistindo aqui.
E tomara que a próxima vez ela venha mesmo para o Brasil, né? Queremos recebê-la aqui na UEL, se possível. Bom, eu acho que todos vocês que estão aqui conosco, todas e todas, já conhecem a professora Gladys Quevedo Camargo. A professora Gladys, como eu disse, é integrante do grupo de pesquisa Felite, mas eu vou fazer uma breve apresentação da professora Gladys, para quem ainda não a conhece. A professora Gladys, ela é graduada em Língua e Literaturas Inglesas, com bacharelado em tradução pela Pontifícia Universidade Católica de São Paulo, possui mestrado, doutorado em Estudos da Linguagem aqui pela UEL. Ela realizou 2 estágios de pós-doutoramento na área de avaliação de línguas estrangeiras no IEL, na Unicamp. Possui vários certificados internacionais, não só de proficiência na língua, mas também certificados, né, no campo de formação de professores, o diploma in English Language Teaching to Adults, enfim, é uma pessoa que tem vastíssima experiência na área de avaliação, foi nossa professora aqui na Universidade Estadual de Londrina e atualmente está na Universidade de Brasília, onde ela atua na graduação, na pós-graduação. Gladys, agora você está no programa de pós-graduação em Linguística Aplicada também ou em Linguística?
Estou nos dois. Linguística e Linguística Aplicada. Linguística Aplicada eu oriento mestrado e na Linguística doutorado.
Que legal, Gladys. Bom, então, sem mais demoras, Gladys, fique à vontade para apresentar a nossa convidada de hoje. Nós teremos, a professora Fernanda vai ter, então, tempo de exposição, e nós queremos, assim como fizemos, né, em todos os outros momentos do EPIC, estimular quem está aí conosco a colocar realmente perguntas, né, acho que é uma oportunidade que nós não podemos perder de termos 2 especialistas em avaliação, né? Então, anotem aí as perguntas e coloquem no chat. Gladys, fique à vontade.
Muito obrigada. So, I am going to introduce Professor Fernanda Gonzalez in English, and her talk will be in English. So, before Fernanda, is she coming? I think she is coming before, yeah, good. Hello, good morning. Buenos dias, Fernanda.
Hello, how are you? Good morning, buenos días desde Mexico, from Mexico.
Wonderful. So it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to Brazil. We're very, very happy that you're here. It's your first talk in Brazil.
It's my first talk in Brazil, and I never thought it would be in a pandemic behind a screen.
Exactly. We want to bring you to Brazil.
I know. Oh, I would love to go to Brazil. Hopefully we get more used to the situation, and it would be such a pleasure and such an honor. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share the little bit of experience that we've been collecting through this study that we're conducting.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give our audience a little bit of your experience. It's not that little, as you said. So Professor Elsa Fernanda Gonzalez holds a PhD in Applied Linguistics and English Language Teaching from the University of Southampton in the UK. She currently works at the Universidade Autônoma de Tamaulipas as a lecturer and coordinator of the BA in Applied Linguistics. She currently is a founding executive board member of the Latin American Association for Language Testing and Assessment, LAALTA, and a member of the Mexican National Researchers System. And there is more. She was a recipient of the 2015 Research Assessment Award by the British Council and a recipient of the 2019 Latin American Research Grant awarded by Michigan Language Assessment to conduct research of the validity and practicality of the Michigan English Test in Mexico. In 2019 and 2020, she was a member of the Foreign Language Experts Group of PISA OECD. So that's not so little. That's a lot. So thank you very much for being here again, Elsa, Fernanda. It's our pleasure. So Fernanda, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you, Gladys, for that very nice introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for this space. Okay, so let's just wait a few moments to get the presentation on screen so that we can get going. Okay, great. So like I said, it's such a pleasure to be here. And obviously, I hope that this presentation is useful for those of you that are listening to us. And especially, I hope that this description or this sharing of experience that I'm going to do this morning can help maybe help us as teachers with young learners navigate this assessment journey behind these virtual realities that we are living in these very, very uncertain times. So I'm going to talk to you about assessing English as a foreign language in reading and writing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Voices of young learner language teachers in Latin America. So this is a pilot study that me and two colleagues conducted at our university, and young learner teachers in a northeastern region of Mexico in the state of Tamaulipas. Sorry. Thank you. The next slide, please. So like I said, young language teachers have quite a burden, lots of work to do when it comes to assessment, especially because experts, and I totally agree with this statement that for some institutions, the assessment job that teachers need to do, or the assessment practice, or the assessment procedures that teachers conduct on a daily basis with their young learners sometimes is taken for granted. We as teachers are required to provide a numerical score of how students are doing in their language development, and that numerical score can actually have lots of consequences, right? When we say taken for granted, I've had institutions where I have had the experience of working at that have said to me, well, it's your job. You do it every day. You just get it done. So I think there's much more to assessment that as institutions, as language institutes, as universities, that we need to raise awareness of, right? Next slide, please. And I think that it's the importance of assessment that that entails us and entails this responsibility as language teachers, as foreign language educators, that or teacher educators, that raising this awareness obviously leads us to raising awareness of the importance that it has. And it's not only for the language assessment field or foreign language teaching field, not only for young learners, but assessment is in our everyday life. Just like Crucian stated in her 2010 article, it's everywhere. We perform all types of assessments in our everyday lives about lots and lots of things. Simply this morning when I woke up, I needed to make a decision on what I was going to wear. So, I mean, even in those little moments of our life, assessment is there, right? Now, in terms of, according to Buckman and Palmer, there's lots of decisions that can be made in terms of language assessment. There's lots of consequences or washback, if you want to call it, in terms of what happens with assessment. What is the assessment outcome? And it's not only for the student. It's not only for the young learner, for the university student, or for it's also for the teacher. There are countries where, depending on the result of students' assessment, it's a matter of the teacher keeping her job or not, or getting a salary raise or not, or getting a different teaching category or not. So, and obviously these types of consequences, this washback for students is actually quite evident. For instance, at our university, students need to have a specific English language proficiency to obtain their BA in Applied Linguistics diploma. So if their assessment result is not what they expect, or is not what the university requires, they simply don't get their diploma, and it can take them years if they don't have the adequate foreign language education. Now, for young learners, consequences and washback of assessment vary depending on the context and the purpose of the assessment. Is it for passing to a different language level? Is it for passing to being promoted to the next grade? Or I remember when I was in, still remember, and I think that is also the importance of assessment, that impact that can have on the young learner. When I was in primary school, I think it was 5th grade, there were these national level tests that I'm sure Brazil also has, and they also have them in Colombia. And depending on the score that I got in my homemade tests at my schools, was the decision of participating in this national test or not. So this washback, these consequences all have various types of impact on the teacher, on the student, on the teacher educator, and on all types of stakeholders that are involved in this assessment process. So I believe those are the two main reasons and main factors of importance in the area of language assessment. Next, please. In terms of the assessment of young language learners, well, there are heavy demands on the teacher to conduct this process in the classroom. Why? Like I said in the previous slide, assessing young learners varies greatly in terms of purposes, and depending on that purpose, the format of this assessment, even the procedures that are taken in the classroom or behind that screen can take various and very different forms. Just like Hasselgreen suggests, formative assessment is considered an integral part of young language learners' assessment for the development of language. So it's should not only be considered a one-time thing that should be done at the end of the month, at the end of every 2 months, or at the end of the school year to report to the institution on a specific report card or on a specific score system, but it's an integral part of the young learner. So it's not only assessing their language, but assessing their language involves all different types of abilities that the teacher needs to consider. For instance, cognitive abilities, language interaction, metalinguistic characteristics, and for instance, the involvement with the task is for the instructions of the task, for instance, does it provide the child with sufficient time to conduct that task according to his ability, according to his cognitive, to his language and metalinguistic ability? The physical abilities, for instance, we also need to consider. Is this test or is this assessment, this monthly assessment, going to require children to be seated in front of the computer for more than 1-2 hours? Are children able to keep their attention span for that long? So these assessment principles, that practicality and that validity that should be included in any test for a child needs to involve all of these factors in terms of young learners. Now, when we talk about formative assessment, are we giving the feedback to the student, considering all of these abilities? Are we speaking to the student in a language that they can take advantage of for their own development of the language? Thank you. The next slide, please. So it seems like in Latin America, and I'm sure this is the case of Brazil, foreign language learning in young learners has become important worldwide, obviously, and it's been increasing globally. And the amount of children that are learning languages, that are learning foreign languages, have increased drastically. For instance, in Mexico, our government since 2004, our federal government, implemented the Programa Nacional de Inglés, which is the National English Program. And It wasn't implemented in all the states at the same time. Some states of the country started piloting the program and so on. So since 2004, there have been gradually more and more children that have been involved in the learning of English. But all of this has also generated the need for assessment, the need, for instance, for teacher language assessment literacy, the need for teachers to know how to cope with assessment in their classroom, the need to assess children in ways that can consider formative assessment as an integral part of their language learning in the classroom, and that can also consider all of these factors that Hazel Green explained in her 2013 publication. So what we have witnessed, as Longling and Chow suggest, is that in the past 20 years, the assessment of foreign language learners has drastically increased because of all of these international phenomenon that has been happening in terms of the increase of language assessment. The next, please. So in terms of research with young language learners, we were commenting a few minutes ago, well, Gladys and I and the other colleagues that are happily and very nicely helping us with this presentation, that in the field of young language learner assessment, it's actually become gradually increasing. It's an area that still needs to be worked on. Now, in terms of English language learners and their learning in COVID, well, there's been quite an extensive effort to understand what's going on during this pandemic and English language learners. For instance, their perception of online learning, teachers' perceptions of the use of video, social media, the role of social media, the role of WhatsApp, for instance, which has been, at least in Mexico, having a crucial role in the learning of English language. And for instance, the experiences of university students has also been explored by Huang, Xing, and Yang. And the next, please, the next slide. Young language learners and their language learning is also getting some attention in Hong Kong, for instance, in the US. Especially, they've been focusing on understanding how teachers have experienced this very drastic and transition to online, from face-to-face learning with children to online learning. Next slide, please. Young language learner assessment also gets a lot of a lot of attention. For instance, ILTA, the International Language Testing Association, has special interest groups, and there is a young language learner specialist in assessment, young language learner assessment, sorry, special interest group, where they focus specifically on the expanding this research area. How scores change over periods of time, for instance, was explored by Chow and Blood in 2020. How tasks are perceived by young language learners, computer administered tasks on young language learner assessment, how they are perceived by children, was also explored. Now, it seems that assessment is a field that is gradually increasing and is gradually getting more attention. But the field of young language learner assessment is actually quite recent. More studies need to be conducted. We need to understand more about how assessment with young learners is conducted by teachers in the classroom, and especially now. There are lots of factors that have a crucial role in understanding how children are being assessed in virtual environments, behind a screen, on their tablet, on their phone, on their computer. Even the format of their accessibility to this infrastructure has an impact on how their assessment is conducted, and especially on the washback of that assessment. So I think we need to understand more about, if you can see on the slide, 2 studies have focused on COVID. and how young language learners are being assessed during this pandemic. For instance, tools that are being used for speaking to assess a student's speaking, and how school suspension, for instance, this study was conducted in Europe, and how this suspension of face-to-face interaction at school, how this drastic suspension has impacted foreign language, English as a foreign language grammar and vocabulary skills in students. And it was actually quite interesting to read that in terms of grammar and vocabulary, there wasn't much impact in them remembering specific vocabulary lists or specific vocabulary aspects of their learning in comparison to before their suspension of school and after their suspension of school. However, the researchers did have some questions about other language skills. So they called upon more research to understand this. Next slide, please. So what do I think is missing? What do I think we still need to do? Well, obviously, we don't know enough. We need to know more about how teachers are assessing their specific procedures, what type of tools they are using to assess their children. Are they assessing their children or not? Are they providing that formative assessment, that integral part of a children's language development during this pandemic? What type of ICTs are they using? What type of information and communication technology are they using? Are teachers using a phone? Are teachers only being able to communicate on WhatsApp on the computer? What are the challenges that they are facing? Or are they actually enjoying it? There was actually a very interesting study in India where it was nice to read that teachers actually had a good time in this transition from face-to-face teaching to online teaching. This study focused on the teaching procedure, not the assessment procedure. So is this the same for assessing? And of course, we need to know more about our Latin American context. These previous studies that in that previous slide that I just shared with you focused on the US and Europe. So I think it was Germany, that second study, that on German young learners. So Latin America needs more attention. We need to raise more awareness about that incredible job that our foreign language teachers are doing in the classroom, that they are doing on that screen and on the internet, on social media, on WhatsApp, on their phones, on tablets, right? Next slide, please. So all of these needs that I consider that we need to focus more on obviously motivated us at our university to conduct this study. So we wanted to explore these experiences that teachers were having in the young learner EFL teachers. And this, I'm going to share with you the preliminary results of our pilot study. And we focused on on 3 Mexican teachers and 3 Colombian teachers. And we wanted to understand specifically how they are assessing and those challenges that they face to assess reading and writing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. In terms of our methodology, we are following a qualitative approach. It has more of an exploratory, interpretive nature, and that's the focus or the approach that we are trying to follow for the whole study. However, today, for the purpose of today, I'm going to share with you the experiences of 3 Mexican teachers and 3 Colombian participants. So if the whole study was focusing only on these 6 people, obviously it would be more of a case study nature. However, this study is still not concluded. We are still in the data collecting phase. So this is the data that we had available right now. We conducted semi-structured interviews through a telephone conversation or through web conferencing tools, just like like this one that we're on today. And teachers chose what we gave the teachers the choice of picking whichever tool was easier for them. And interviews took about 25 to 35 minutes in total. And we interviewed them at several once during the summer of June of 2020. So the pandemic had just started. It just had a few months that we had transitioned to virtual learning. We in terms of these 6 interviews, we conducted semantic analysis, and so to prepare the data for that analysis, we transcribed the interviews, and we identified 3 main themes on which the teachers focused on during the interviews. They focused on assessment techniques. They shared a lot about how they conducted that assessment, their assessment difficulties, the challenges that they faced, and the usefulness that they believed this type of format of assessment had for their students, their young learners' language development. The participants, we had 3 females. We had 3 females and 3 males, actually. We had 3 teachers in Mexico, 3 teachers in Colombia. Sorry about that mistake. And all of them were in service in public schools. And they focused on 4th, 5th, and 6th grades of elementary school. So teachers' age of range was from 18 to 21 years old. So they were actually quite young. And their experience was about from 5 to 8 years of experience with young children. So they were teachers that were young, that had some type of knowledge about technology, and they used technology in their everyday classes previous to the pandemic. In terms of the context, in Mexico, as of March of 2020, public schools stopped face-to-face learning and teaching. We drastically transitioned to online teaching and learning. Students maintain contact with their teachers with different types of tools: cell phone, WhatsApp, social media, Facebook, like Facebook or Instagram. And there are teachers that use email. Teachers, not on this study, but as we have been collecting data, we have learned that teachers are even trying contact with their children once a week and taking the specific learning material and assessment material to the house of the child. Because of financial issues or infrastructure issues, the child is not able to have access to any type of virtual tool. So the teacher takes copies of the work to the house of the child. Teachers in this study reported the use of videos, WhatsApp, Google Meet for lessons, or different resources on the internet. And there is a very interesting national policy in Mexico that I think is having a very interesting impact on how assessment is conducted. And that is that every child needs to pass their courses. So I've had comments from teachers that say, what's the point of assessing if they're going to pass anyway? Their parents are not handing in their child's work, are not uploading it to the platform, for instance, or are not sending it through WhatsApp because they're going to pass anyway. So this national policy, I think, needs more attention in a different type of study, which obviously I cannot explain to you on this occasion, but I hope that I can get to it in the future. In terms of Colombia, the context was very similar. They also transitioned to virtual environments, and they had a slower transition in terms of teachers were more gradually, acquainted to their online tools. They weren't. It's it felt like in Mexico, teachers were from one day to the other, okay, everything is online, get to the platform and conduct your teaching and assessment. And in Colombia, the teachers reported that they focused on one single tool step by step. So they had this slower transition to online environments, of course, talking about this specific case of these 3 teachers. And they made use of online resources, just like the Mexican teachers. And they reported to have class once a week for 2 hours on a weekly basis. And these 2 hours were synchronous sessions. And the Mexican teachers were, at the beginning of this, suggested that at the beginning of the pandemic, that they tried to have synchronous session, but it wasn't always possible. So they have been trying different tools, and I think some of them even tried the national broadcasting of English classes and other content classes, core classes, that the federal government implemented. Thank you. The next slide, please. Now, in terms of the results and the reading assessment, Pablo suggested that he wasn't able to give any feedback. No podía hacer la retroalimentación o el que ellos pudieran saber en qué mejorar. No pude evaluar, no había con qué. I couldn't assess. There wasn't anything to do it. Es un poquito frustrante. No tienen vocabulario muy amplio. Hay unos muy motivados, pero no todos. It's frustrating. Not every child has vocabulary that is sophisticated or a wide repertoire of vocabulary. There are some that are very motivated, but not everybody. So I couldn't assess for various reasons. There was no internet. There was no cell phone. I just thought it was unfair. I didn't want to. So these conditions motivated the teacher to just avoid the assessment of reading. And actually, that's something that we seriously need to consider in these types of studies. What can we do for teachers in front working with young learners so that assessment, instead of being something that is a burden for the teacher in the classroom, can actually help the teacher. Next slide, please. Maria was a different case in Mexico. For reading, she had different types of exercises, such as comprensión, razonamiento, búsqueda de palabras, comprensión lectora por medio de cuestionarios electrónicos, historias, videos con lectura de seguimiento. So she had different types of activities that included comprehension, reasoning, finding specific words, looking for specific words in the text, reading comprehension through these electronic questionnaires or forms that are very useful nowadays, stories, videos with reading so that they can be followed through. La dificultad más grande fue no poder apoyar a mis alumnos por videoconferencia. So this teacher was having a serious issue. She was having trouble accepting that reality of not being able to help her children face to face. And not being able to have that video conference was making her assessment job even more difficult. She felt that her child's language development was not as strong as it would have been in face-to-face. Next slide, please. Luisa was another teacher, and she felt that she had done a massive job of adapting to these circumstances. And she said that nos adaptamos a las circunstancias para llevar a cabo nuestra labor. We adapt to the circumstances to conduct our job and respond to the needs of our children. And so what she started doing was adapting texts that she found online. She would create comprehension questions, and she would do them in her everyday class. She would use, for instance, these Google Forms, or she would use the chat function in these online applications and she stated she no aplique un examen formal. She didn't use a formal test to assess her children's reading. It hasn't been easy. No ha sido fácil. Let's say that as months have gone by, it's gotten better. And some students didn't even have data. By data, no tenían datos, she means like internet connection, or they didn't even have any money to buy any data. So these children that she worked with had difficult financial issues. So sometimes they didn't have money to hire that internet service. Colombia, for instance, in terms of reading assessments, Samari was one of the teachers that we talked with, and they would access a link. The children would access a link with the reading, and they would integrate audio to that reading so that children had an easier reading development by listening and reading at the same time. So that was actually an integrated skill approach, which she would then complement with, on some occasions, not all the time, but with oral participation of students, reading that text that she had shared through a link. The student sometimes was not familiarized with technology. The audio failed. Students did not feel confident to participate well, al menos en estos niveles. Like she says at the end of the quote, at least at these levels, she felt that sometimes students felt anxious or did not have enough confidence in their own knowledge and in their knowledge about technology and how to use this technology. So it was very frequent for them not knowing how to turn on the audio, how to turn on and off the microphone. Jesus, for instance, was another teacher. He gave lots of details about how he was doing things in terms of reading. Everything was through the platform. I would assess reading. I would provide reading for the comprehension of reading. They would answer some questions, contestan unas preguntitas, algo sencillo, something simple. Les compartí un texto. En la videollamada, I would share with them a text in the video call, and everybody would read at the same time. As an individual form on Google Classroom, I would share with them the file of the reading. I would create an assessment task on the platform of Google Classroom, and students would answer the questions, or on Google Forms. Always multiple answers or true and false questions. Preguntas abiertas, no. Not open questions about the reading. A menos que sea completar una información específica. At least not elaborated open questions about the reading, but she said she had sometimes implemented if the answer was very specific or very short. One of the difficulties that Jesus found was that the little amount of time that they had for their classes, ellos tienen una limitante que es una vez a la semana, 2 horas a la semana. So this once a week, 2 hours a week online was actually difficult for them. Tengo que abarcar todos los estudiantes y todas las skills. So he had to do a lot in 2 hours to assess every skill. Next, please. Mateo, for instance, he focused on la prueba saber, which is a Colombian test that young learners need to take in Colombia, and it focuses on, one of the areas that this test focuses on is reading. So he integrated sometimes samples of reading exercises from these tests. He said he would do it at least once a month or twice a month. So it wasn't it seemed that this teacher was not teaching for the test, which is something that we as assessment experts suggest to avoid. And he stated in terms of challenges that he faced, y digamos que de pronto se enfrentan a la lectura y hay términos que no van a manejar. So sometimes the text that is included in these tests and that he, as a consequence, included in his assessment in the classroom, that it's just sometimes the language used in the reading is complicated for the child, and not all the vocabulary terms are understood by the child. And he felt that this virtual situation did not help him or did not help the child increase that vocabulary repertoire. Next slide, please. In terms of writing assessment, well, it was a little sad that Pablo also avoided the assessment of reading. He just focused on the assessment of writing. He did not explain or report any assessment of writing. And it was actually kind of curious that for this section, he mentioned that he did assess reading, while asking him the first time, he said he didn't actually focus on reading and assessment. So I believe he did include materials in his teaching of reading, but he didn't include it as a formal aspect on the test. In terms of Maria, of writing assessment, she included the organization of words and short sentences to assess writing, and to match sentences and the meaning of sentences with complements. For instance, she would divide sentences into parts, and students needed to match, which she considered writing. I would need to double check that, if that would be considered writing or if that would be considered any other type of skill, language skill. And like she said with reading, it was very difficult for her to not be there with the student, and she felt frustrated that she wanted to help her student, but she wasn't able to. Next slide, please. Luisa used her textbook and the exercises in her textbook to assess writing. And her children would send her via WhatsApp the answers to those exercises. Everything, casi todo era de forma electrónica. Almost everything was electronic format, and se consideró el manejo de implementos electrónicos como una habilidad propia de escribir. She considered the use of these electronic devices, such as a computer or writing on the tablet or writing on the cell phone, as a writing ability, which I think we also need to explore a little bit more what she meant by that. And she had difficulties with infrastructure as well. Microphones, internet. Next slide, please. Colombia. Well, Samari used a rubric for her more formal assessment of writing. Every month she stated that she needed to assess writing more formally, so she used a rubric for that. In terms of Jesus, he focused more on the development of short texts. For instance, he would include the grammatical structure that the students were working on during that time, and he would focus on that aspect of accuracy on writing. It was actually very interesting to see that this teacher used Padlet, which is an online electronic portfolio type of application that allows students to use peer feedback. So he implemented that assessment of peers. Next slide, please. For Mateo, for both reading and writing, he considered that vocabulary was difficult for him to manage because he sensed that students were having a hard time with that. He felt that there was an improvement in students' writing. Si hubo una mejoría, lo que cada uno escribió mejoró. What every child wrote improved. Digamos de un 100%, un 60 o 70, teniendo en cuenta el nivel. He believed at least 60% of the contents of the writing improved. There wasn't big advantages, developments, but we need to consider that most of students are struggling with this virtuality. And students that were very good face-to-face learning or were very brilliant suddenly changed. So he sensed that assessment was also impacted by this sudden change that students were living. Next slide, please. Okay, I think we are very short of time. So in terms of general conclusions, what we found, in some cases, teachers reported to not have conducted assessment, nor formally or informally. In both countries, teachers reported to make use of formative assessment. So that was very nice to see. It was very rewarding to listen to the teachers say how formative assessment was not maybe the most important thing in their assessment, but they did include it. Colombian teachers stated to have combined ICTs, formative assessment and summative assessment, while Mexican teachers implemented other strategies they believed allowed them to adapt to the challenge of virtual assessment. So it seems that Mexican teachers that were interviewed had a more adapting role in their assessment of these children. Next slide, please. The main issues that these teachers reported that they perceived, well, I think the first one was a lack of technology and internet connection that their children did not have. So this needs to be considered when assessment is conducted. Feedback. Even though they tried to implement formative assessment, these teachers reported to have that difficulty with feedback and providing feedback to their students. I had one of the teachers, now that I remember, explained that she would use, for instance, on Google Classroom, the application for the feedback, but she wasn't sure if students were actually reading it. The lack of time. In previous slides, I mentioned that there was some students a teacher that said that 2 hours a week with them on a synchronous session she felt was not enough. And that adaptation of students to virtuality has changed the teachers' assessment procedures. They have had to keep in mind how these factors can actually have washback on students' assessment. The format of this assessment, either Google Classroom, Google Forms, or Padlet, or WhatsApp, didn't allow them to fulfill their teaching purposes nor complete the curriculum content. So they did need to adapt the contents of their teaching and the contents of their assessment because of this virtual format that we are now living with. What have we learned? As researchers, I believe that we have learned that we still need to do a lot of reflection in terms of how necessary is the test. For instance, that teacher in Mexico believed that assessment was a test and only the test, so he decided to avoid it. Is this test or other tests or other types of assessment, are they actually giving us the real picture of what students' language development is? Is this test or is this assessment format going to make students more anxious or more nervous? We believe that formative assessment, like Hasso Green stated, is integral, is extremely important. I believe that if in the classroom it was important, in virtual reality, in these virtual learning environments, can help reduce lots of these anxiousness that children may feel when being assessed, or that teachers may feel when conducting their assessment procedures. It can help students reflect on their reality. It can help students reflect on their learning. Obviously, it can help teachers adapt that assessment process. And I totally believe that children can also be encouraged to assess themselves. This teacher that used Padlet with the assessment of reading, integrated. He was working with 6th grade, and he was happy to explain how he used it. And he believed that it helped, that it worked, and it helped students feel less anxious, feel more comfortable with technology. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of implications, I think it's very important to be consistent with the assessment that we are conducting. And this not only corresponds to the contents that we are teaching our students through these platforms, but it should also correspond to technology. Do students actually feel familiar with that tool that we are using? Do students feel familiar with Padlet before you are conducting your assessment? I think that's crucial to allow them to have that confidence in their use of these ICTs. I think flexibility is very important. I certainly think that if we are required by our institutions to provide a score, why not do it through formative assessment, through that work that they are doing throughout the school year? Why? And maybe that flexibility of leaving a test aside to avoid getting students feel that anxiousness with technology, with the contents, and with the test. So I think this flexibility is crucial with contents of assessment, with that correspondence of assessment with technology. Why? Because I think we don't know exactly what's going on behind the screen. We might see the video of our child, we might see the picture of our child, but we don't actually know what the child is living behind the screen. I think that even at a distance, students want to continue learning, and they still want to have that teacher assessment. They still want to have that teacher feedback. My son loves to see that comment of his teacher, muy bien hecho, Mateo, or things like that, right? And I think that patience is number one on our list. We need to have patience with ourselves as teachers. We need to have patience with our students. Why? Because I think that patience is going to help us get through this pandemic and adapt more easily. Next slide, please. Very few participants. I think that is one of the main limitations of this study that I presented today, and we still need to understand if perceptions have been changed of these 6 teachers. We interviewed them in June of 2020. A year has gone by. Maybe they are more adapted. We could have complemented these interviews with virtual observations or task analysis to fully understand how assessment was being conducted through the pandemic, because in the end, the results that I shared with you today were teachers' perceptions, what teachers reported. So we didn't actually observe or analyze any of the tasks. I think we need to do that. Social emotional issues were not explored today. We didn't analyze teachers' anxiety or fear with assessment, or children's anxiety or fear with assessment. Should we do that? Should we be focusing on that? And we focus mostly on the challenges. Maybe we should also focus on the advantages. Are there any advantages, or isn't there a good side to this? Next slide, please. And finally, I would like to finish today with this quote from Mohamed and Oki, where they state that responding to the challenge of delivering valid assessments during these unprecedented times of the COVID-19 pandemic was certainly not easy. However, the efforts will be undoubtedly led to developments in the field of language assessment. So, yes, it's been hard. Yes, we've needed to adapt abruptly. However, I think we're going to learn a lot from this. Our teachers that are working with young children and that are teaching them a language are going to come out of this pandemic more adapted to emergencies, with much more technological tools and with much more tools to keep their students motivated, right? So I'm sure that we need to focus more on what we've learned from all of these challenges. And the next slide would be the references. And next slide, please. There's 3 slides of references there. And thank you so much for listening today. I think I took a few more minutes than I should have, but I hope that it's been useful for you, and I hope that you felt maybe there's been some coincidences with Brazil in terms of living experiences, right?
That's true. Thank you so much, Fernanda. That was so interesting. I was really, my mind was blowing with so many questions and things I wanted to ask you. I wanted to interrupt your talk.
Good, because questions means that there was someone listening.
Yeah, no, I have so many things I'd like to talk to you about, and
Great.
I'll ask the girls that are at the backstage when, if there is any question in the chat, please interrupt me because I cannot see the YouTube chat at the moment. But I really liked it. Thank you so much. I was wondering, I was really impressed with the research trends that you brought. They are brand new. They are 2020, 2021.
Well, I've been gradually trying to construct them, and believe me, it hasn't been easy because I was happily surprised because I thought that there was not a lot of research out there in terms of English language learning, in terms of assessment.
Yeah.
But actually, I think the research community has been very active. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we've been stuck at home. So
True.
we've,
So true.
I think that has been a benefit of this pandemic and of working at home,
Yeah,
that researchers have been very active, and that's great. So that, because that gives us more tools to understand how teachers are feeling or what teachers are doing, and our young
exactly.
learners are well. Yeah.
On the other hand, assessment, you only found two pieces
Yeah,
of
but that doesn't
research,
mean
right?
they are the only two. I'm
All right.
pretty sure there are more. I'm well. Like I said, this is an ongoing project. We haven't fulfilled it, and I
Yeah.
still need to look for more studies. I will be very happy to share them with you
Yeah.
as while I find them.
Yeah. And two things called my attention. I think all these studies that you showed are group work. Nobody's doing research on their own. So they're, joining forces, and this is so
Yeah.
interesting. And also the fact that maybe there aren't many studies on assessment, it's because we need more time to study assessment, right? It's not something that you do, in a month, right?
No, no, no. Like I said, I mean, this was the piloting stage of our interview, and
Yeah.
we started in last year, I think in April. In June, we piloted, and I shared with you this year the
Yeah.
that interview protocol,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and it takes a lot of time. And we are 1 year later, we are just beginning to actually collect the data for the study. So
Mm-hmm.
time is crucial. We need time to reflect, and I think just like us as researchers need time to do that reflection, to do that analysis, to find the literature, to see what's going on in the world and what has been already done. Children need that time.
Yeah.
Children need that time to adapt to these tools. Like the teacher said, it might be surprising to see that he didn't assess nor reading or writing in this Mexican teacher. But that comment that he said in the end, I just thought it wasn't fair.
Yeah.
Um, he thought it wasn't fair because his children hadn't had the time of that adaptation. He
Mm-hmm.
felt it wasn't fair to actually assess them when they didn't even understand that computer in front of them.
That's true. You know what? I was thinking about the similarities between Brazil and Mexico. When the pandemic started, we noticed that the interest in assessment issues grew tremendously. So we had lots of people talking about assessment, looking for information. How
Right?
should we assess?
That's
People
great.
trying to transfer the traditional assessment practices they would use in face-to-face teaching to the digital world, and that doesn't help. That doesn't work, right? And
Yeah.
then this I think I noticed that because I'm always looking at things and talking to people, and many people would come and say, "Oh, can you say something about this? Can you talk about this?" And I
Right.
was
Right.
like, "Wow, never, never before had I talked so much about assessment in Brazil." And this is great. I think this is fantastic, and I think it happens the same in Mexico, right?
Right.
With this growing interest, because that's where things get down to the teacher's hand. As you said at the beginning, assessment is considered a teacher's duty.
Yeah.
So you can even teach them to work with platforms, digital literacy, but the assessment part is in our hands,
Yeah.
right?
It is in our hands, and I think that I certainly agree with you that it somehow this pandemic has helped us as teachers, to raise that awareness in ourselves and maybe to actually reflect on how assessment has such a crucial role in how students develop their language. Why? Because at such a young age, when for instance in preschoolers or first graders, I'm sure obviously not only them, but language is an integral part of their environment. And so that language development it's not only sitting in front of the screen and taking notes or copying what is on the screen, but I mean, it's a daily life function, and assessment can have that important and crucial role in that development. It's just that I think that it was taken for granted on such a high level. And teachers did not actually have that time to sit down, maybe. And in this pandemic, we have more time to do it and to do that reflection.
Yeah, and also there is the problem of having to report a grade to the system, right?
Yeah. I had one. I mean, we've been, like I said, we're still collecting data. And last month, I interviewed a teacher who is working in rural areas here in Mexico, and he was very unhappy and he was disappointed because he said that he had 18 teachers in his classroom. 18 students from 5th grade, and only 2 students were actively engaging with his materials that he shared on WhatsApp. He shared the materials with their parents on WhatsApp.
Right.
And he described how on his own he learned how to use YouTube. On his own, he learned how to make these videos. He learned how to use the Google platform. Because he considered that he didn't implement technology before the pandemic.
Right.
And in the end, he's one of the teachers, not the only teacher, one of the teachers that is physically taking the material to the students' class to get more engagement.
I see.
So what I'm trying to say with this is that teachers are doing a lot. This pandemic has actually, like we said, raised an awareness of how they implement assessment, but it's also raised an awareness of how those little actions that they do in the classroom have a big meaning. He said that once he started taking this material, learning material and also assessment material, he takes the assessment material to this child's house every month, every 2 months, every 3 weeks. And so he said that it increased from 2 students reporting these activities via WhatsApp, it increased to 10. So he still felt that from 18 students, 10 students was a low number, but much better than 2 students. So obviously this raised my antennae in terms of language assessment literacy. How can we help teachers? He did a great effort to learn about technology. He didn't know. He did it all on himself. He did it with videos on YouTube. He did it with web pages. But how can he actually take advantage of that great effort that he's doing in terms of assessment? Like, what can we do about that? How can we help those teachers?
What you described in terms of difficulties, problems, not only for teachers, but also for students, that's very much the same, just like Brazil. So it seems that you were talking about
parents, Gladys. For parents, that's something else that we should take up as research. Maybe we could do it together. Think about Brazil and Mexico. What are our parents living?
Yeah.
What are the experiences of these young learners' parents during assessment?
Yeah.
My experience, for instance, I have two boys, one in 2nd grade, one in 1st grade of secondary school, which we call secundaria. I'm not sure which is the grade after 6th grade. And the teacher sends them the exams on the platform. Yeah. No comments about that, but I'm just going to share the experience.
Right. Okay, go ahead.
They send the exams, and we need to print them out. The exams have no instructions. And so the teacher, through the video conference during the class, explains to the child what he needs to do in every exercise. And parents, once the exam is finished, we have 5 minutes to take pictures of the exam and upload the exam to the platform.
Wow, really?
Yeah. So, but that's my experience in the northeastern region of Mexico. And it doesn't mean it's the same experience in all the country, obviously, but that's one mother. And I'm sure,
yeah,
I'm sure there's lots. I'm sure you are reflecting on many things that can be improved in that assessment procedure, especially with young children, right? So,
well,
teachers are doing lots of things,
uh-huh,
and of many nature, and we still need to understand what they're doing.
right. Yeah, that's really something to look at. Now, Fernanda, we have some questions here
Sure,
from the
of
chat,
course, great, awesome.
and I'm trying to find them here. One of them here is Fernanda. It's Juliana asking you, Fernanda, do you think any of these difficulties can be avoided or could be avoided somehow? Now that we're talking about parents, huh?
Well, that's a very good question. I think they could be diminished. I think it's extremely difficult to, avoid every single difficulty, especially when we're working with technology. Technology is so unpredictable.
Yeah.
A teacher can have her assessment beautifully planned out, and it's going to be fun for the child, and it's going to develop their language reading skills, but maybe that day there was a storm and they lose electricity, there's no internet, there's no computer, and so that assessment plan needs to be, you need to go back to the drawing board and plan again, because you can't leave it the same, the way that you had already planned it. It needs to be adapted.
Right. Yeah.
So I just feel that actually the difficulties can make us stronger, but that we can find ways to get the best out of them. Maybe not avoid them, or do the best, because I just feel that we can't avoid them completely, but we can get the best out of them. And to do that, like you said, Gladys, we need time and we need to reflect. We need to get our teachers reflecting on what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Fernanda, there is another question here by Juliana Brossi. So, Fernanda, what would you say that influenced this decision of the Mexican government for a nationwide policy for teaching English for children?
That's a very good question. And I still need to actually look into this. And I would be very happy to share my answer once I know more about it. But for instance, I can't give you the opinion of this teacher that I interviewed that works in rural areas. He had a very negative opinion about it. Because he believed that, because we talked about it during the interview, and it's data that is not on this presentation because it's just someone I interviewed 2 months ago. And he just rejected the whole idea because he believed that was one of the main reasons why parents, for instance, were not sending their work, were not, for instance, engaging in their child's learning of the language. And I'm sure if that was happening with English, with the child's English learning, it was happening with other subjects, with math, Spanish, history, or whatever course the child is taking. But he felt that instead of helping teachers or project at a national level that children are doing good and that children are ready to be promoted, it was just making their job more difficult. Because, for instance, he felt that in his classroom, he had students that didn't have the language abilities to be in that class. So there are students that just pass the levels or pass grades and they get to secundaria, to secondary school, and we need to start over the English curriculum. ABC, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, red, blue, and green, from when they have taken English, even in public school, since first grade. So, for instance, this is an important impact of this policy, that instead of, I can't say that it's in all cases, but in some cases of some children, this policy, instead of allowing them to develop their language, it is maybe estancando, like we say in Spanish. It's I don't know how you would say that in English.
Like hindering or stopping?
Hindering, exactly. That's the word.
Yeah.
Hindering their language development, right?
Yeah.
And so they get to the next level of their basic education, and they need to start over again with things that they saw when they were in first grade.
Yeah, well, actually, there is a question by Juliana about that. Is this returning to face-to-face classes? In this returning to face-to-face classes, do you believe we will face the consequences of all this situation? This is by Juliana Tonelli.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. I've been constantly thinking about that.
Are your boys online, or have they returned?
My boys are still online. However, they take class every morning from 7:45. Well, the oldest one connects at 7 a.m. and he's in class all morning until 2:15. The young, yeah, it's a long, and that's something else that I think, not only for teaching but for assessment, is it healthy for children to be that long in front of these computers? But going back to the question of our participant here, I truly believe that there's going to be consequences of this virtual learning, virtual assessment. I just hope that schools are open to that curriculum adaptation. I strongly feel that it's impossible to avoid impact of this situation. And I just, there are schools in our city. We are the capital of the state of Tamaulipas. If you ever have time to go to a map of Mexico, we're in the northeastern region. And schools in Victoria, which is the city where we live, they have been gradually returning to face-to-face learning. Our school has not returned. Our university has not returned yet. There are, like we say in Spanish, chisme, gossip, that we will be returning in November or even until January. But I think that one of the responsibilities that we have as a research community or as teachers is to first understand what is the impact of this with any type of diagnostic assessment with our children. How can we understand what they still need to, for instance, I was very worried with my first grade son. Last year, he began primary school online behind a screen. He still has not physically been to his school, and he's in second grade. So there are lots and lots of skills and micro skills and independent skills, social skills, cognitive skills that children in first grade develop. And I was constantly worried about when they get back to face-to-face learning, will teachers and schools and institutions, when talking about Mexico, will they have that flexibility of curriculum adaptation? Because it is obviously that he will not have all the skills that, and I'm sure it's going to be the same with every child. They are not going to have all the skills as if they were in face-to-face learning.
Yeah.
So once again, assessment needs to be there. Assessment has to have a crucial role in understanding that impact. Formative assessment, diagnostic assessment, to understand what children still need to work on once they get back to face-to-face.
Yeah, that's true. I totally agree. And I'm going to make a hook with one more question here by Juliana Brossi again. Is there any suggestion to help to recover the repertoire building of these young learners? Is there a plan to contribute to these teachers that participate of the research? And then I think connected to this, I was going to ask you about language assessment literacy in general, but
Yes.
let's focus on this.
Yeah, I think that in that language assessment literacy is obviously going to be part of our plan. Once we finish with the study, which we hope we finish collecting data by the end of the year, I will be very happy to share with you, hopefully next year when we get that paper out. I think that we are still in the learning stage of how we can actually help teachers recover from once we get back face to face. For instance, in my case, going back to face makes me nervous. It's I mean, all these health issues, and how am I going to diagnose what my students still need to work on in terms of their courses? And I'm at the university level. So I think that with young children, diagnostic assessment, like we just talked about in our previous, is going to be part of that recovering repertoire. It's going to be part of those strategies. But I think that one of the main suggestions that experts with young language learners, even the British Council, the University of Huddersfield, which is one that I included in the references, they strongly suggest that we make this type of assessment fun for the child. And because that's the word test makes them nervous.
Sure.
And it's going to have that washback on the outcomes of that test. So is that washback actually revealing the true essence of what what children can do with their language skills? So I think that would be a very important suggestion. Patience, like I said at the end of the presentation, we need to be patient with ourselves and embrace that nervousness. I'm trying to find ways to embrace my nervousness with my children and with my students when we get back, and to find. I think that the more curiosity you have with understanding what children have been through during this pandemic, through any type of assessment tool, any type of assessment purpose, the more curious you are about that, the more aware you are going to become of that child's situation. And it's going to give you much more tools to build the assessment procedure once we get back to the classroom. So I think that in terms of your second question, how we plan to contribute to these teachers, well, it's going to be through assessment literacy, obviously. We have the contact of our participants. All of the participants were very, very eager to share what they have lived. We did some convenience sampling, obviously, because being interviewed is not something that every teacher likes. They feel they are on the spot and they feel they are being exposed some way. Yeah. So all the teachers that participated in the study were very eager to continue learning about the project, and we made a commitment to them to contact them next year once the results are out, and to invite them to, I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do it and the format, but to invite them into maybe workshops or training sessions that can give them more tools for their assessment procedures in the classroom.
Well, in a way, you ended up answering Naive's question. Naive is here with us.
And hi, Naive. Hi.
Naive, yeah, Naive from Colombia. Thank you, Naive, for being here with us.
Thank you, Naive, for being here this morning.
Yeah, and Naive said, based on your experience, what would be the best advice for teachers besides reflection? Because reflection alone could fall short, right?
Yeah.
And so you mentioned, and she also says that it's what you described is the same in Colombia. Her nephew experiences are the same process here, right? The same process.
Yeah. Well, that's something that attracted my attention also. Like, Latin America is huge.
Yeah.
And the differences in the contexts that we have in Latin America, even in the same country. I mean, Brazil is a very, very big country. The context that you have in Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, are very diverse, and the purposes of assessment obviously are very diverse, but there are lots of similarities in what the teachers are experiencing in terms of their assessment procedures. And Naive, I think that keeping our assessment to the purpose, keep in terms of young children, finding ways of making assessments, how can I say it? Maybe not an everyday activity, but maybe an activity that doesn't spike their anxiousness, doesn't make them more nervous than it has to. I think that if we avoid that, we can get assessment going and we can get the answers that we want from assessment, right?
It's funny because sorry.
No, and once we get back face to face, I was going to say diagnostic assessment needs to have a crucial role in that.
Yeah, but I think we will also keep on using technology, right? For example, Juliana Brossi here is asking, is there a special tool such as an app for the students to practice reading that you can tell us about? So that may facilitate the reading assessment. So even if you come back to face-to-face, technology will help, right?
Yeah, I think technology is here to stay. And as much as we want to fight it, it's going to backlash if we fight technology somehow. So if we make it part of our lessons, if we are face-to-face or not, it's going to help us transition in a much easier way and adapt in a more peaceful way. And I think that tools for reading, British Council has lots and lots and lots of reading materials that can be used online. I would need to get back to you on that. I would very happy send Juliana a list of links if you give me some time. And I hope participants, or my email is on the slide. I think it's not there, but maybe our monitors can share it on the comments of the YouTube channel, and send me an email, and I will be very happy to share with you a list of reading tools to assess reading and writing tools to assess writing online also.
Oh, so, that's great. That's really
I hope
awesome.
our monitors can share their email and send me an email, and I will very happily send a list to you.
Oh, that's
we're
wonderful.
Running out of time right now, right?
Yeah, we're running out of time. I want to thank you so much, Fernanda, for this conversation. It was wonderful. As usual, I love talking to you.
And we had such a good time. Thank you so much for this invitation. It was such an honor. I hope that the presentation today has fulfilled your expectations, and obviously that it's useful.
I'm sure it was. And I'm sure this recording will be available on the research group. So you can share later and you can watch it again, because it's going to be very useful to all of us. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
And I'd like to, before I leave this moment that I have here, I'd like to thank Juliana and all her team, all the girls and the boys that are involved in this wonderful event. Congratulations.
This organization has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes. Long life to EPIC. Okay. Thank you very much, Juliana. Thank you, Fernanda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gladys. Thank you, Fernanda, so much. Hope we can keep in touch. And I was just thinking to myself, wow, we have so much to do. we have so much ahead.
I know. And to tell you the truth, I felt overwhelmed as I collect the data, because the more I collect data, the more I feel I need to know more. And I want to know more about what's going on. And we need to do more as a research community, as a teacher community, so that we can give our children the best attention that we can give them.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you, Gladys. Obrigada. I hope I said it right. Obrigada.
You did.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much, and have a great day, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye. Bye, Gladys. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bom, gente, esperamos que vocês tenham... Eu estou assim, uau, né? Temos tanto a fazer ainda. A área, quem pôde acompanhar, né? Todo esse encontro, nós falávamos especialmente no painel de teses e dissertações, o quanto nós já avançamos enquanto área, o quanto nós já temos pesquisas extremamente relevantes, mas após falas como essas, eu pelo menos saio com a certeza de que há muito mais ainda a ser feito. Bom, agora nós então entramos finalmente no nosso encerramento. E eu gostaria de chamar comigo a vice-líder do grupo de pesquisa, a professora Cláudia Kawashi Furlan. Oi, Claudinha.
Oi, gente. Oi, Ju, tudo bem?
Tudo bem, querida?
Tudo jóia. Obrigada.
Então tá bom. Cláudia, eu estava pensando, né? Ultimamente tenho pensado bastante o que o EPIC representa, né? Não só para nós, né? O EPIC, para quem não sabe, nasceu de uma demanda local, nasceu de uma demanda aqui da cidade de Londrina, a partir da implementação, né, não em forma de lei, mas de projeto do ensino de inglês na rede municipal. E depois o EPIC foi se consolidando até que nós chegamos aqui nessa 5ª edição. E para nós, eu acho que seria uma tarefa muito árdua listar, né, todas as conquistas, os avanços desse encontro, né, principalmente para o FELIT, enquanto um grupo de pesquisa que tem se proposto a fazer realmente pesquisa séria, uma pesquisa engajada e que principalmente possa contribuir para a sala de aula, né? Eu acho que o nosso maior desejo com as nossas pesquisas e principalmente com o EPIC e o seminário de avaliação não é só nós nos mantermos, né? Claro que isso é importante, nós precisamos ter, como a gente sempre fala, uma ação informada, né? As nossas ações em sala de aula, elas precisam ser informadas, então, claro que falar de teorias é muito importante, a gente precisa disso, né? E é isso que o EPIC tem se proposto também, mas acho que vai muito além, né? Então, falando especificamente do grupo de pesquisa FELIT, foi em um dos EPICs, no último EPIC, na verdade, né? Que eu tive a grata satisfação, não de conhecer a Cláudia, mas de trazê-la para Londrina. A Cláudia fez a palestra de encerramento do último EPIC em 2019, e hoje, né, ter a Cláudia como oficialmente vice-líder do grupo, para nós é uma alegria, né? Então a gente vê como essas conexões, elas vão nos aproximando, nos fortalecendo, que é como eu disse antes da fala da Fernanda, né, Cláudia? Uma ação docente, uma profissão, que muitas vezes nós nos sentimos isolados, sozinhos, sem ter muita certeza se o que a gente está fazendo. Eu, pelo menos, quando eu comecei, eu tinha esse sentimento, né? Não tinha muita certeza se o que eu estava fazendo fazia sentido, e a gente poder criar essas redes é maravilhoso, né, Claudinha? Então, acho que a gente encerra com chave de ouro, falando de avaliação, né? Mas não poderíamos deixar de encerrar oficialmente fazendo um balanço do evento, né, Cláudia?
Com certeza.
Afinal, foi um pouquinho mais de um mês de atividades intensas, né? Muitos desafios, né? Eu estava pensando também, para quem nos acompanhou, tentamos fazer o nosso melhor, mas foi a primeira vez que nós fizemos um evento totalmente remoto. Quando iniciamos, né, foram muitas reuniões, muitas conversas de WhatsApp, muitos meets, né, para a gente poder pensar o melhor formato para o EPIC, porque não queríamos deixar de realizar o evento, né, em função até mesmo da nossa inexperiência com atividades, assim, eventos remotos, mas também não queríamos realizar algo que não fizesse sentido e que não fosse agradável para os nossos mais de 200 inscritos. Nós tivemos mais de 200 inscrições, tivemos, então, aí, para quem acompanhou, palestrantes do México, da Irlanda, enfim, né, da Finlândia, e fora os participantes do Brasil inteiro.
Com certeza, Ju, isso mesmo, né? Nós tivemos 2 palestras de abertura, uma palestra de encerramento que foi hoje, fiz uma colinha aqui, ó, que eu fui contando, eu falei, gente, é muita coisa, né? Depois que passa, durante a gente não vai se dando conta, mas depois a gente fala, peraí, foi tanta coisa, aí eu fui contar. A gente teve 7 sessões de comunicações com 39 trabalhos sendo apresentados, né? E a cada sessão a gente ficava no WhatsApp ou no grupo aqui mesmo, né? Assim, quanta coisa, gente, quanta coisa boa, com trabalhos tanto de pesquisa como de prática docente. Então, eu acho que o EPIC também, ele se renova com essas práticas, né? É claro, é como você disse, a gente precisa ter as nossas teorias, as nossas escolhas informadas, mas é tão bom quando a gente consegue ver as práticas de todo o Brasil, então aí a gente tem uma ideia ali, outra lá, é muito bom, né? Assim, então nós tivemos 39 trabalhos apresentados, um painel de teses e dissertações, 4 mesas, enfim, muitas coisas, né? Muita reflexão. Eu acho que assim, a gente não pode negar, né? Quantas reflexões, quanta coisa ainda temos que fazer, como você disse para a Fernanda ao final, né? A gente ainda tem muito trabalho, e ela também falou, muito trabalho conjunto. E eu acho que é isso. A gente precisa trabalhar em conjunto, que é o que o Felite vem fazendo, né?
Eu acho que essa rede, né, Cláudia, que eu insisto em falar, essa comunidade, isso é essencial, não só quando nós falamos no campo de educação linguística com crianças, mas em todos os campos, né, da ação docente. E por falar nisso, né, Claudinha, nós não poderíamos encerrar o EPIC sem, acho que não é reconhecer, porque reconhecimento eu espero que nós tenhamos dado, né? Mas eu acho que publicizar, né? De tornar público, né? Porque talvez as pessoas vejam um evento como esse né, e não imaginem a estrutura, né, que nós temos, estrutura humana, viu, gente?
Humana.
Porque estrutura física, né, nós todos sabemos, né, que são iniciativas muito pessoais, né, cada um aqui contribuiu muitas vezes com iniciativas pessoais. E agora, então, nós vamos passar a apresentar rapidamente para vocês quem são essas pessoas maravilhosas que estiveram por trás disso tudo, cada uma dando uma contribuição, um pedacinho de si, do seu tempo, do seu esforço, da sua energia, da sua criatividade. Esse grupo é muito criativo, né? E só para, antes da gente passar a trazer essas pessoas maravilhosas para a tela, só gostaríamos, né, Cláudio, de reforçar o convite para que as pessoas que apresentaram o trabalho não deixem de encaminhar os textos para os anais. É muito importante a gente ter essas práticas registradas, né? E o pessoal também está colocando aqui um recadinho sobre os certificados. Então, eu quero reforçar, vocês receberão os certificados digitalmente no e-mail que vocês cadastraram, tá bem? Nas inscrições, mas nós pedimos encarecidamente um pouquinho de paciência, porque quem emite o certificado não somos nós, é a Pró-Reitoria de Extensão da UEL, e como vocês devem imaginar, são muitos eventos, porque eu digo que agora que nós aprendemos a fazer evento remoto, né, agora ninguém segura, então a universidade inteira é muito ativa, então tenham um pouquinho de paciência. Bom, eu quero começar, então, chamando o nosso squad, né? Gente, toda essa parte de arte, de divulgação, postagem nas mídias sociais do EPIC, tudo que vocês receberam, né? Tem aí tem umas carinhas por trás, né? Então, eu vou até colocar aqui um fundo musical para vocês, né? Porque eu quero apresentar essa equipe. A Cláudia ri, porque a Cláudia não dá conta das minhas loucuras, né? Mas, gente, eu falo para eles, walk on, nós temos que continuar. Estamos cansados, mas a gente precisa continuar. dá para parar, não é? Então, ó, walk on, terminamos, né, apresentando essa equipe maravilhosa. Maria Fernanda, nossa querida Mafê, que trabalhou nas mídias, auxiliou aí nos posts com muita criatividade. A nossa querida Gabi, que estava aqui o tempo todo fazendo streaming, gerenciando esse squad aí, né? Que é a Maria Fernanda, o Rafael e a Gabi. Ó, o Rafa não pôde estar conosco, mas ele está aí dando um oizinho para vocês. Então, conheçam as pessoas que tiveram aqui por trás, né? A gente ficava o tempo todo pedindo, faz um post disso, dá para fazer um post daquilo, né? Queridos, muito obrigada. Mafer, a Mafer até sonha comigo à noite, gente, de tanto que eu perturbo ela. Ontem ela me contou que ela sonhou comigo, gente. Gabi, querida, no words, muito obrigada. Walk on, pessoal, a gente não pode parar. Nos vemos no próximo EPIC. Quero chamar agora o resto do pessoal que esteve também na organização conosco. A nossa querida Juliana Brossi, que nos ajudou aí com os monitores, organizando toda a parte das comunicações, mediando mesa, fazendo perguntas intrigantes, né, Gil? Muito obrigada, querida. Ó, walk on, não pare, um pedacinho de cada vez. A nossa querida Isabel, que gerenciou toda a parte de e-mail, gente. A Isa gerenciou o e-mail do EPIC, respondendo, repassando e-mail, né? Avisando quando as coisas não estavam indo bem, mesmo aí em meio ao trabalho, à escola. A Isabela dá aula para crianças. Querida, muito obrigada. E, ó, walk on, não pare. Tem outro EPIC aí daqui 2 anos. Muito obrigada. Nossa querida Letícia, que ficou também nas mídias, auxiliando nos posts do Facebook, colocando os recadinhos aqui no comentário, nos auxiliou também nas comunicações, né, funcionou ali como monitora, o que precisava. Querida, muito obrigada. Walk on, não pare, Letícia, a área precisa de você. A nossa querida Mariana Secato, da mesma forma também, se colocando sempre à disposição para o que precisar. A Mariana é pós-doutoranda no programa de pós-graduação em Estudos da Linguagem, faz parte do FELIT. Querida, muito, muito, muito obrigada na sua correria aí de escola. Obrigada.
Prazer foi meu, eu que agradeço. Obrigada pela oportunidade.
Eu acho que nós teríamos outras pessoas para entrar, né? Mas estão todos aí também na lida do trabalho. Então, muito obrigada a todos e todas. Claudinha, obrigada pela parceria.
Imagine,
obrigada,
eu que agradeço.
Né, estar conosco nesse desafio que é liderar esse grupo de pesquisa que cada vez cresce mais, né?
Que bom, é isso mesmo. E lembrar também, né, Ju, de agradecer o pessoal que atuou moderando as salas, que nós convidamos e aceitaram, e até assim, às vezes de última hora que precisava, porque sempre, né, tem um probleminha com a conexão, com alguma coisa, e as pessoas vieram ajudar. Então, muito obrigada para todo mundo, a comissão organizadora maravilhosa, essas pessoas que apareceram aqui, e todas que também puderam contribuir para que o evento acontecesse, né?
Acho que a todos e todas que estiveram aqui conosco, né, assistindo, firme, acho que é esse conhecimento mesmo que nós precisamos buscar, não é mesmo? Eu tenho medo de ser injusta, né, e deixar de falar o nome de alguém, mas queremos agradecer aí o Marco, que foi um desses, né, que nos ajudou, mediando mesas, estando na sala. o Otto Henrique, que não pôde estar conosco agora, mas que é do Grupo Felite, o Fábio, a Helena, que também não pôde estar aqui aparecendo na tela, né? Eles estão aqui, não tem condições de aparecer na tela agora. Então, assim, gente, muitíssimo obrigada. A nossa Isabela Hall, que está dando aula agora, inclusive, mas que fez, em muitos momentos, esteve aqui conosco, fazendo StreamYard, enfim. Acho que é para dizer que nós não podemos parar e não podemos caminhar sozinhos, né? Eu acho que talvez a gente possa, sozinho a gente vai mais rápido, né? Mas juntos a gente vai mais longe.
Vai mais longe, é isso
então,
mesmo.
Eu acho que é isso.
Agora, dona Juliana, a senhorita espere um pouquinho, porque a senhorita é cheia das ideias de coisas, mas tem gente no grupo que também tem surpresas, tá?
Oh, meu Deus!
E não é fake, hein, gente? Porque até eu não sei o que eles conseguiram finalizar aí, ó. Isso aí é coisa desse pessoal, vamos ver.
Olá, meu nome é Fabiana Parreira. Atualmente estou como assessora pedagógica da Secretaria da Educação de Votuporanga, no interior de São Paulo, prestando assessoria aos professores de inglês da nossa rede. Eu vim compartilhar com vocês a experiência maravilhosa que eu estou tendo depois que eu conheci o Grupo Felite. O Grupo Felite me trouxe muito conhecimento. Eu posso dizer que está sendo um divisor de águas para mim e trouxe novamente aquela paixão pela educação, a paixão por pensar o ensino de inglês voltado para as crianças, principalmente para essa faixa etária. Eu gostaria também de compartilhar com vocês a experiência maravilhosa que eu tive no EPIC, tanto como apresentadora, né, como participante de uma das mesas redondas. Eu tive a honra de receber esse convite e também enquanto ouvinte. Posso dizer com toda a segurança que eu nunca tinha visto uma partilha de conhecimento tão rica, uma partilha de experiência tão autêntica, da forma como tem sido conduzida aí, tanto no EPIC, quanto por todos os trabalhos onde o Grupo Felite está envolvido. Então eu só tenho a agradecer por todo o empenho de toda a galera, de todos os componentes desse grupo e pelo evento maravilhoso que foi o EPIC em Casa 2021. Muito obrigada e parabéns a todos os envolvidos nesse evento e no grupo de pesquisa. Abraço!
Olá a todos, o meu nome é Jaqueline e eu estou aqui para compartilhar com vocês um pouquinho da minha história e da minha profunda gratidão e apreciação ao EPIC. Eu sou professora de língua inglesa desde 2010, atuo nos campos do ensino médio, ensino fundamental, anos finais e iniciais, e desde 2019 atuando também na educação infantil, que foi a causa principal que me levou ao EPIC. 2019, mediante concurso público, eu fui convocada para atuar na área de educação infantil aqui na minha cidade, Cândido Mota, interior do estado de São Paulo, e era o ano de inserção do ensino de inglês nessa modalidade. Então nós não tínhamos currículos anteriores, parâmetros e nem diretrizes para seguir. E eu entrei em desespero. Eu chegava na minha casa e eu só chorava, eu falava, meu Deus, como eu vou fazer para isso dar certo? Então, em setembro, eu tive a oportunidade de participar do EPIC. Quando você chega num ambiente com pessoas com currículos maravilhosos, monstruosos, que olham para você com gentileza, humildade, respeito, independentemente de você estar nessa área de atuação há 2 anos, há 10 dias ou há 5 minutos, e falam, nós estamos aqui pelo mesmo objetivo, que é uma aprendizagem significativa, uma educação de qualidade, com foco no desenvolvimento das nossas crianças. Você percebe, eu não estou sozinha, tem tudo para dar certo. Quem escolheu esse nome, Encontro, não poderia ter escolhido melhor. Muito obrigada. Esse ano eu não levei a caneca, mas o meu crachá de 2019 está aqui.
Oi, meu nome é Pablo, eu sou professor de inglês da Rede Municipal de Oswaldo Cruz, interior de São Paulo. Também sou aluno do curso de especialização de ensino de inglês para crianças, da UEL, e vim aqui falar um pouco do Felite. O Grupo Felite, ele foi um acontecimento na minha vida. Em épocas de pandemia, ele me ajudou muito nas minhas aulas, me deu um norte, um momento em que nós todos estávamos perdidos. E não somente isso, o Grupo Felite, para mim, ele me trouxe uma representatividade no mundo acadêmico que lá quando eu comecei a estudar, lá quando eu era muito jovem, eu não via. Então o Grupo Felite, ele trouxe essa coisa de eu poder chegar lá, que na minha juventude eu achava que não era possível. Então eu tenho muito a agradecer o Grupo Felite, e quando falamos de Felite não podemos esquecer da professora Juliana Tonelli. Não dá para não associá-la ao Grupo Felite, que é uma pessoa que sempre está tentando nos ajudar, tentando fazer com que nós achemos os nossos caminhos dentro do ensino de inglês para crianças. Então, falando em Felite, falando em Juliana, eu só tenho uma palavra: gratidão. Muita gratidão.
Se fosse necessário descrever o EPIC em poucas palavras, seria por meio da seguinte frase: você não está sozinho. Nas palestras, mesas e comunicações desse ano, esse dizer ecoou nas vozes de muitos participantes. Enfim, nos encontramos e somos muitos, sentindo coisas assustadoramente tão parecidas e vivendo num país tão abrangente, com realidades, pessoas e contextos tão plurais. Porém, reitero, nos encontramos. E entre encontros e reencontros, trazemos estes 2 momentos.
Oi, gente, eu sou a Cláudia, vim aqui gravar essa mensagem para agradecer a toda a comissão organizadora do EPIC e agradecer principalmente a professora Juliana Tonelli, porque sem ela esse evento não teria sido possível, né? Ju, muito obrigada pelo seu empenho para que esse evento acontecesse da melhor maneira possível e aconteceu. Muito obrigada pela sua força, porque a sua força nos motiva, nos instiga a continuar defendendo a educação linguística na infância, a continuar acreditando e lutando por uma educação pública de qualidade para as nossas crianças. Muito obrigada por tudo. E o EPIC veio para marcar esse encontro, né? Esse encontro de vozes, esse encontro de pessoas, de trabalhos maravilhosos que vêm sendo desenvolvidos por todo o Brasil. Então a gente realmente pôde se encontrar, a gente pôde refletir, dialogar, não só com pessoas do Brasil, mas pessoas de fora também, que você conseguiu trazer para esse evento. Então, muito obrigada. O evento foi maravilhoso e eu tenho certeza que as próximas edições também serão. E a minha primeira participação no EPIC foi em 2019. Infelizmente eu não consegui participar antes, mas foi um divisor de águas para que eu nunca mais saísse dele.
Olá! Hoje eu estou aqui para falar de um encontro, meu encontro com a professora Juliana. Quando falamos no EPIC, muito mais do que encontro acadêmico e encontro científico estão em pauta. O nosso primeiro encontro se deu no Fórum de Profissionalização Docente realizado em Londrina em 2014. Depois disso, eu não parei de perseguir esse sonho de encontrar a Juliana como orientadora, como parceira de vida e de projetos. Depois desse encontro, eu descobri que eu estava indo na fonte, não só a fonte pioneira do ensino de línguas para crianças, da formação de professores para esse campo, mas a fonte de inspiração, a fonte de motivação, de garra, de trabalho, de dedicação, de amor à nossa área, a fonte de lutas por uma educação linguística justa e equânime para todas as crianças de todas as esferas. O nosso encontro em 2018, quando eu finalmente passei no doutorado e ela me aceitou como orientanda e eu a escolhi como orientadora, me fez sair da minha zona de conforto, sair de Goiás em direção ao que eu buscava. E aí eu encontrei muito mais do que uma orientadora e muito mais do que um grupo de pesquisas. Encontrei uma família, encontrei uma mãe acadêmica que cobra, que exige, mas que ampara, que cuida, que acarinha e sempre acredita no nosso potencial. E daí eu não tinha imaginado o quanto eu ia encontrar possibilidades de aprendizagem, de parceria, de desenvolvimento, mas acima de tudo o que eu encontrei foi inspiração no seu exemplo, Ju. No seu exemplo de mulher forte, dedicada, dinâmica e incansável. E foi nesse encontro que eu me encontrei, que eu me achei, né? E espero que, assim como eu, muitas outras professoras, Brasil afora, continuem te encontrando e continuem encontrando toda a inspiração que eu encontrei. Que possamos ter muitos outros encontros como o EPIC e outros encontros vida afora, Brasil afora, com você e junto com você, com outras pessoas que também vêm buscar essa fonte de inspiração em você. Um grande abraço, minha profunda admiração e respeito. Até breve.
Loving can heal, loving can mend your soul, and it's the only thing that I know. I swear it will get easier, remember that with every piece of you, and it's the only thing with us when we die. Keep this love in its photograph.
Somos todos Tonelli.
Where our eyes are never closing, hearts were never broken, time's forever frozen still. So you can keep me inside.
Juliana, muito obrigada pela sua força, muito obrigada pela sua inspiração e por ser incansável. Nós precisamos disso tudo para que a gente possa continuar acreditando e defendendo a educação linguística com as nossas crianças. Tudo isso só acontece por você. Obrigada. E obrigada a todo mundo que está acompanhando, né? Acontece por vocês também que estão aqui.
Mas não é só isso. A gente deu um jeitinho de colocar alguém muito especial nessa brincadeira. Entra aqui, Silvio.
Viva!
Olha, eu não sei quantas pessoas estão aqui conosco ainda, né? São quase 11h30 da manhã, quase meio-dia, mas vocês são demais. Gente, não tem palavras. Muito obrigada, viu?
Você merece.
Obrigada, gente. Muito obrigada mesmo. Um beijo grande para vocês. Vocês fazem parte da nossa vida.
Obrigado por
Obrigada, Silvio.
Obrigada, Silvio.
Nos honra. Muito obrigado.
Vocês fazem parte da nossa família, vocês fazem parte das nossas conversas do almoço, do jantar, antes de dormir, ele está indo aqui, do sábado, do domingo, do caminho para a UEL, vocês estão nas nossas conversas aqui, comentários, né? Muito obrigada, e acho que, assim, eu me sinto muito honrada, mas nada disso seria possível, né, uma pessoa só. Então, quando vocês me veem acreditando nessa formação de professores, na educação com crianças e para crianças, é porque eu tenho pessoas comprometidas, compromissadas, éticas, amorosas, engajadas, verdadeiras, né? Uma coisa que eu sempre falo para o grupo de pesquisa, você ter a aprovação do comitê de ética para sua pesquisa, vocês já me ouviram falar isso, é muito fácil. Pode ser trabalhoso, né? Enviar aquele monte de documento e conseguir um número, mas a ética no dia a dia, essa que a gente precisa primar, né? A ética de como você trata as pessoas, como você trata o seu orientador, como você trata a sua orientadora, como você trata as outras pessoas que já fizeram história, né? E eu gostaria de mencionar aqui as professoras Leandra Santos, professora Cláudia Rocha, que assim, né, meio que junto comigo, mas não posso apagar a história dessas pessoas, que, né, eu acho que isso é ética no dia a dia, você reconhecer quem já fez, quem faz ainda, né, é algo que eu sempre falo para o meu grupo de pesquisa, a ética na pesquisa é no dia a dia, no comprometimento, né, como você trata o professor da escola, como você trata a tia da merenda, como você trata, né, o secretário da pós-graduação que te atende ao telefone, ou alguém que responde os e-mails, aí vocês que são de outros grupos, outros programas de pós, né? Isso é ética na pesquisa, como eu trato as pessoas que estão no meu dia a dia. Então, gente, muito obrigada por mais esse evento maravilhoso. E esperamos, né, que o próximo 6º EPIC, o 5º seminário de avaliação, seja presencial, para que a gente possa fazer algo ainda melhor para todos vocês. Tá bem? Um beijo grande e muito, muito, muito obrigada. Até já!